Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 399. Altiplano! Well, I don't know why I sounded like Mario.
It's me, Mario!
Altiplano! This is definitely not an Italian game.
Welcome, citizens of Meeple Nation. For the next 30 minutes, sit back and enjoy.
Meeple Nation is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. GameToppersLLC.com. Check them out at their website, GameToppersLLC.com.
Where should we check them out?
www.GameToppersLLC.com.
What do they sell?
Game Toppers. Get your Game Toppers at GameToppersLLC.com.
What's a game topper?
There's much more than just Game Toppers. However, their Game Toppers are phenomenal, as are their much more.
I like it. We are your hosts of Meeple Nation. I'm Nathan Howard.
I'm Dave Holliday.
And I am Andy Holliday.
We are missing Logan. He had some work shift issues, so he will not be joining us tonight. We will hopefully catch him next time. Go to our website, meeplenation.com, and check out all the goodies we got there. We got blogs, several bloggers now that are working with us, new and exciting information and points of view. So we're excited about that. Go check those out. We have bios you can check out, not just the four of us, but you can also go check out those blogger bios as well. Links to all of our episodes. So you can go way back to the first episode, almost 7 years ago now, to last week's episode. Find those all in the podcast history. Photos from our Instagram page that you can peruse as well. So feel free to go to that, subscribe so that you can get blog releases as they come out. Subscribe to our Instagram, like us on Twitter, give us a high five anytime you see us. That's meeplenation.com.
This week we are discussing our last of the economic games. We're discussing Altiplano. And Altiplano is a bag building game. I think this may be the first bag building game I've ever played.
You've played Quacks and Quedlinburg.
I've played this before I played Quacks, I think.
Then this may be the first one then. You know you.
I played this quite a while ago. Probably right around the time I played Quacks and Quedlinburg. It's a bag builder, and it's set in the South American highlands of the Andes Mountains.
Whose mountains?
Andes.
Your mountains?
My mountains. They go along with my mints.
Nice. You're quite the entrepreneur.
I sure am.
Making mountains and making mints.
The competition for limited resources is considerable in this game. Honestly, it's kind of tough to get certain resources. The main focus of Altiplano is on building up your own production to be the best that it can be, or at least better than that of the other players.
Which is kind of like a bear chase.
It is a bear chase, absolutely. But it isn't every game. You just got to do it a little better than everybody else.
It's going to be better than Dave. That's my goal. I
Not-
seldom reach that goal.
Not hard to do in this game.
I came in dead last, so...
Oh, that's right. You were the only one that I beat.
Yeah, our last play, I came in dead last.
As you mentioned right there, there's an engine building aspect to this game. Engine building is huge for me, and it's definitely one of the things I look for most in a game. But this engine building is totally unique, very different than others, which I think is amazingly awesome.
In this game, each player starts with a unique role, an asymmetrical power, that gives them access to different goods and methods of production. Players have limited access to production of resources at the start, but can acquire these abilities later in the game and improve their player boards. So everybody starts with a standard player board that has all your actions that you have available to you, and then your unique role card attaches to your player board. It'll provide you that ability when you go to the location that is attached to that ability. So there are 7 different locations. Order of those locations around the board is random. They almost look like little islands, but they're just different locations
that represent the top of the plateau. They're random at setup, but then they're static the rest of the game.
Correct, yeah. They don't move once you have them set up. Those locations will have... So you're right, Dave. Each of these locations represents a different part of the plateau. So you have the market, the farm, the mine, the village, the forest, the harbor, and the roads. Obviously, the harbor is not at the top of the plateau. It's going to be at the bottom of the plateau. Each of these locations is going to have a different resource or resources on the location itself, and 3 of those will also have cards that you can acquire during the game. Your player board will have several different sections that will correlate with each of those 7 locations. So when you play an action and put your resources on the spaces that are available on your player board, they will fuel powers that will give you something, but you can only use those abilities when your token or your pawn is on that particular location.
Which I think is kind of cool. And on your turn, you have your ability to go to any of those other locations. You have the ability to walk again if you spend your food resources correctly. Every player has a cart, and that cart will allow them to move 1 to 3 spaces. You don't have to go clockwise or counterclockwise. You can go either direction. But that 1 to 3 will allow you to reach any location, right? Because there's 7 tiles and you're already on 1. So there's 3 in each direction. You can use the location that you're at, and then you can move to a different location and use that location. Later, if you buy a second cart or you play a food, you can walk to an adjacent location so that you can take more actions during your turn. I really like that aspect of this.
Yeah, and movement's kind of key, and it's kind of the tricky part. You want to be able to get the most out of each round, which means you need to be able to move. Also, it's dependent on how efficiently you're able to build your bag up with the different resources you can put in there. And like we said at the beginning, some resources are not available to gain just on your player board. You have to gain upgrades for your player board or do some of the other actions or gain some of the cards to get those resources. One of the cards that Dave and I fought over the last time we played, they were the canoe cards. The canoe cards are worth 2 points. Each and every one of them is worth 2 points. However, you gain, each one of those will have a resource depicted on it, and you gain that resource. Now, there's 1 of each type of resource. There are a total of 11 resources that you're going to be building your bag up with. At the very beginning of the game, you only have access to...
You start with 4 resources total, depending on your person that you start with. Will determine what resources you have.
Yep, that's correct.
I wanted to go back to the movement thing real quick and what you were talking about, getting the most out of your movement. One of the things that's key in this is remembering to end your movement on a spot that you're going to be able to use at the beginning of next round before you move, right? Because then you get free action that doesn't require movement to get there at the beginning of every turn, if you do that well.
Or ending your movement somewhere where, so for example, like Nathan was saying, everybody starts with a cart in the game. You can get multiple carts, but if you don't have more than 1 cart, or you want to plan your turn out, let's say I've placed a food on my board that will be allocated for movement. When you use your first cart, it's free. But any movement after that first cart, whether you're walking or using a cart, costs a food. If I don't have a second cart, I can only walk, and I know I'm going to try to play a food there. I may want to end my turn adjacent to a spot that I'm going to be able to use as well.
Right.
So going along those same lines. Planning your turn out is absolutely key, and I've screwed that up several times last time we played. I'm like, why didn't I just switch my movement so that I ended my turn in a different spot? One thing that I notice is you tend to, and not always, but you tend to upgrade 1 or 2 particular actions and make them exceptional during the game so that those places are typically going to be the places you're trying to get to because they're the ones that are most beneficial for you.
Right.
As you are building your bag, there's another mechanic in this that scores points, which I love, and that's storing your resources in a warehouse. Obviously not the only way to score points because there's plenty of ways to score points, and each token you gain is scoring you points, but it's one of the big ways to score points. And if you can manage to fill up your warehouse, it's worth mega points.
And that's really tough to do.
It is.
Yeah, if you can do it. If you fill up the last one, 20 points.
Just for that row.
Just for that row. Yeah. That is huge.
Yeah, I've never seen anybody get close to that, but there are a total of 10 rows in your warehouse. You have to fill your warehouse from the lowest number. As you're filling your warehouse up, the resources you've put in your bag, you're going to be filling your warehouse with those resources, with the exception of food. You cannot store food in your warehouse. When you store something in your warehouse, you're going to put it on the lowest row that has nothing in it. Unless you have a token that matches that resource already in your warehouse on a row where there's space for it, and you have to put it in a row that already has a like resource. Once that's filled up, then you can move on to another one. If I stored 2 different resources, then I'm going to put those on 2 different rows. which is one way that you can bump up, because each row progressively gets to be worth more and more points. So it's one way to kind of bump up to the higher level points, even if you only store one resource in the lower ones.
Right. That's something to keep in mind, is that you don't have to completely fill the row before you add to the next row. It just has to be a different resource than any other row that you have.
Essentially, I mean, if you get enough resources, you could put one resource in each of those rows and then get something that you produce a lot of in that last row, kick out those 20 points, but then you've depleted your bag considerably to fill up your warehouse, which does kind of alter what you can play, what you can progress, which games like this, I love where there's a variety of ways to win.
Absolutely. Right. And the fact I like the balance, what you were just describing, Nathan. The balance of, okay, am I putting this in my warehouse? Because once I put it in there, it's no longer available to me. Not only that, there's limited resources on the board. Deciding what you're going to put into your bag, you really want to finish the row. You don't score the points unless the row is complete. Am I going to put this resource in this row knowing that I might not complete that because I don't have enough to fill it right now, and maybe there's only 3 or 4 left? Or am I just going to use it to bump up to the higher point rows? You do still score points for your resources, like for each individual one in the warehouse.
Because each resource has a point value to it at the end of game scoring. And so, for example, wood, stone, and cacao are each worth 1 point, or wool are worth 2 points, and so on. Each resource token that you have of those types is worth that many points. Now, back to that warehouse, though. One of the things that's cool is there are a couple of ways throughout the game that you can get corn. And corn it never goes into your bag. It's nothing other than a thing to store in your warehouse and to help you fill those rows, essentially. You may start a row with 1 wood and you can finish it with 2 corn. That corn is a great filler when you need it to help you finish a row and score those points.
Yeah, and the nice thing about corn is it doesn't have to follow the same rules as far as placement. You don't have to fill in the lowest most spot on a row. You can put it in any space as long as you're not skipping rows where you're skipping an empty row. But you can put it anywhere. You can even start a row of corn. However, if you do that, that entire row has to be corn. More beneficial to use the corn to fill in spaces that you already have resources on that row, rather than having to constrain yourself to having to fill a row full of corn.
So much variety in this game that I really, really like it. You can use that corn here, there, fill up a higher column, you can fill up a lower column. So maybe you want to fill up some of those lower columns just so you can get higher. And the last game that we played, I ended up trying to fill up the highest rows so they could give you the most points. They didn't give me enough points. Dave still beat me. Everybody beat me in that last game. But just to have those options, there's no way you're going to fill that warehouse. But if you can stack those resources and take advantage of them.
Talk about what each of the locations that you're moving around actually will give you, or at least what resources are going to be stored there, and what you can do on your player board. You have the market is the first location that we'll talk about. The market is where the glass is stored. Glass really has no function in the game. It's worth 4 points. It's the resource that is worth the most points. If you can get glass and then store it in your warehouse to get it out of your bag, it does no good. You can't sell it. You can't do anything with it. It's just worth a lot of points. That's one you want to get stored in your warehouse as quickly as possible once you start gaining it. The other thing that is stored on that location are the order cards. Order cards, essentially commodities that someone else is in desire of, that you've received an order and you're going to fulfill that order. It's going to be 2 or 3 resources that you're going to need to take off your board when you play them and put them on that card. Once they're on the card, they are not yours anymore. They stay on the card for the remainder of the game. You don't score points for them. They don't go back in your bag.
You're talking the resources.
Right. But the card itself is going to give you a corn, and it's going to give you far more points than what the resources that you put on the card would have given you.
You mentioned earlier that the warehouse is generally the best way of getting points. Generally, somebody who does well with the warehouse wins the game.
Not always, but many, many times, unless they can get a lot of the resources and really beat people to the resources.
Right.
Or fulfill a lot of orders.
And that's what I was going to point out, is in our last play, we actually had a surprise visit for game night. We haven't seen Ryan in a while, and Ryan came in and played with us, and so that was fun. We played Altiplano. It was interesting because throughout the game, we were all pretty certain who was going to be destroying who. we all kind of thought Andy was going to destroy everybody, which he did for the most part. But Ryan took the strategy of completing orders, and he did really, really well. In fact, he tied for the lead, but then he had the...
Note to self, don't spend all your money unnecessarily in the last round, because that's the tiebreaker.
Right.
Which doesn't seem important until it's important.
Right, because if I had not bought the carts that were not necessary that last round, I would have won, but Ryan won because of the tiebreaker, which was gold.
It was interesting because, I think it was at 93 points or something like that was the tiebreaker. So it's really strange to have two people tied way up there on the scoreboard, but that's how it played out.
I agree. It was awesome how Ryan did that, because I've never seen anybody really go for the orders as heavy as he did. And he did. He scored a ton of points going that route.
I think he had 55 points just from his orders. I stay away from that because that takes my resources away, right? And that's like generally the anti-Dave thing to do.
In a way it does, but honestly, so does storing things in your warehouse takes your resources away. But also fulfilling orders gives you corn, which helps you fill up your warehouse. So if you're kind of doing a little bit of both, or at least not ignoring your warehouse completely and going the orders route, it can be super beneficial. Right. That's one of the two ways to get corn. The other way is by going on the road space. So when you do your road space, it costs you a wood and stone. You have to go on the road location. When you spend those two resources, you just go down one on the road track. It's going to give you one of two things. At the beginning of the game, you get to pull 4 tiles from your bag, and that's what you have to work with for that round. As you're moving down that road, you're either going to increase the number of tiles you can pull, or it's going to give you a corn to place in your warehouse. Dave, you kind of went heavy on road strategy to get more options, I'm guessing, once you started pulling from your bag. The corn seemed to be nice, but that seemed to be your main strategy, was just to pull tokens.
Yeah, I spent the whole game trying to build my engine, and I sucked. As I'm remembering, I think I only ended up like 9 points behind you guys or something like that. So I was fairly close. But yeah, my goal was go up the track quick because I want to pull more resources out of the bag. Theoretically, I'll be able to do more stuff. Problem is I had so much stinking food in there that all I could do was move.
You should have used your food to fill up all of your movement. If you don't use a resource, it just stays on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so you could have saved that food in a variety of locations and then used something else.
It would have thinned out your bag, right? So get to your other stuff. And going back to the market, that's one of the locations where you can actually sell things. Spend a coin to get an order. You can also fulfill your order there, and that's where you can sell resources. So you can sell wool and alpacas for 1 gold. You can also sell stone and ore for 1 gold. Textiles you can sell for 2, and silver you can sell for 3. That's one of the primary ways to gain money in this. You can also purchase upgrades, which is why you want money.
Which is something I did quite a bit of. With my character, I was able to build a silver on the first round and then use it to buy some of those upgrades. But I got stuck not progressing my movement up the track on how many resources I could pull out of the bag. 3/4 of the game, I was only pulling 4 resources, and you guys were all pulling 6. Yeah. Dave was pulling 8 resources out of that. I was hamstrung so bad that I couldn't keep up. I was just limping along. I mean, that was huge. Produce a lot of silver, but I was too focused on trying to make sure that I produced the most stone because I got 7 victory points. And so I was sacrificing tons of other victory points to make sure I got these 7 victory points, which is why I was 30 points behind first place.
We kind of had opposite problems. You said that not going up the road kind of hamstrung you. Well, waiting until way late in the game to get any of these upgrades. I waited until way late in the game to get on the upgrades. This is really how you build an engine in this game, is by upgrading your plateau. When I go to the market, I can do more than just the things that are there. It gives me more options, and they're usually better options. For example, at the farm, typically you can exchange 1 food and 1 alpaca for 1 wool. But there's an upgrade tile that lets you exchange 1 alpaca for 1 wool. So it gets you better rates at which you can gain resources. Getting those upgrades is really great for building that engine and helping you accomplish those things.
Makes your turns more productive. Movement's such an integral part of this, but if you can make an action that's really helpful, then the efficiency of your turn goes way up, and you don't have to spend so much food on movement or worry so much about movement because, it may be a little bit repetitive, I guess. I don't think any of us really felt that way, that it was overly repetitive.
No, I don't think so at all.
Those upgrades can be enormous. Really opens up a lot of windows, and that's how you gain access to the resources that are not available at the first of the game. You have to get those upgrades on your board and purchase those upgrades. And the upgrades are tiered, so certain upgrades come out at the beginning of the game, and then it goes down to tiered A, B, C, D. They will progressively come out, and some of the better ones will come out towards the end of the game. You have to decide, okay, is it worth getting this upgrade at this point in the game? I'm only going to get to use it a few times. Or do I spend my time doing something else?
Yeah, most of my upgrades were in the market, which was really nice because towards the end of the game, I was able to produce 2 silver, and then I would take those 2 silver to the market, which would give me 6 money to spend. I could spend that money on upgrades. Those upgrades would then provide me other options. I could use it to gain alpaca. I could spend money to get wood, which for me apparently was really tough in that game. I really stuck close to the mountains region and the market. That was really kind of all I did, which was a detriment to me. Got too siloed into that pattern. Okay, I'm going to make money, but then I wasn't using that money effectively to allow me to get better resources or resources that I wasn't normally producing. You guys were far more effective at that than I was. Hopefully I've learned a couple of lessons. Next time will be better.
One of the resources that's not available at the beginning of the game is the cacao. Super useful resource because there are locations that are on your starting player board that cost cacao. Obviously, those aren't available to use at the beginning of the game. Once you have a cacao, that opens up a ton of stuff. So there's 3 locations that you can do once you have it. When you go to the forest, there's 2 locations on your player board that you can play resource tokens. 1 cacao with forest would give you either a food, a textile, or a glass. One of the few ways to get glass in the game, which again are worth the most points. Textiles are also high value, worth 3 points. 2 of the highest value things are in the forest. You can get them with cacao. Very important to get, I feel anyway, or at least super helpful to get if you want to gain these higher value resources. Glass in particular, if you're trying to get those stored into your warehouse.
The resources that you gain and you produce, you spend them, you put them in your wagon, and then that wagon will get recycled into your bag. What is really nice is when you spend a resource, it doesn't necessarily go away. It's spent, it goes to your wagon, and then when they recycle, those items are going to come back. For example, if you use the cacao to gain a glass, both of those resources are going to go to that wagon, and then both of those resources are going to go into my bag. So that cacao doesn't go away. If I can manage my bag well, then I can limit those resources, which means going back to using your warehouse well, food that's clogging up your hand, or maybe putting some of those resources on a location that you're not ready to use. That whole management is very well done, I feel. Adds so much to the game that there's so much going on. Again, I'm going to go back to there's so many ways that you can motivate your hand, the deck, your scoring, the moving. For me, that really shined. Was a big factor of what I really like about this game.
I agree. You know, with a bag builder, it's hard not to compare it to a deck builder. Like you said, your wagon, your container, that's like your discard pile. Your warehouse is almost like culling cards, but you still get points for them. You're refining that bag. You're getting the stuff out of there that you don't want. Maybe they don't fuel any actions, or they're not going to fuel the actions that you really are interested in doing. There's definitely a parallel between those two. I think that this has maybe a whole nother level of complexity that some deck builders definitely lack, which I think is great.
Increases the weight of the game.
Absolutely.
Which is something Dave likes.
Plus, you're limited by this number of spaces you have on upgrades and on your starting player board. There are locations where you place resources, and you're limited with what you can do because of those. I may want to have the tokens to do a ton of stuff at the harbor, but I only have so many spaces to place resources at the harbor. So even if I could do a ton, I could have endless actions there, but I'm limited. I think that's great. Kind of forces you to diversify a little bit.
Absolutely.
Or if you feel like you have too many resources that fuel one ability, maybe a good time to start filling your warehouse with that stuff. Either add more stuff that's going to fuel other abilities, or start culling stuff and moving it to your warehouse. Get some better pulls and refine that bag just a little bit more. As far as that mechanic goes and the complexity, I think it's great.
If you had a hand where you drew out 6 wood, and you can only put 2 wood in your harbor to get a canoe, what do I do with this other 4 wood? It would be nice if I could put all 6 there, but you can't. A couple of upgrades that will allow you to increase a location's occupancy. Still, you're limited. If you have a resource that exceeds what you're wanting to do, you're going to have to diversify and find someplace else, whether that's storing it on a different location or, like you said, Andy, putting it in the warehouse.
One of the other locations that we haven't talked about yet is the village. In the village is one of the locations that you're going to be able to purchase a cart. 4 cart slots available to you. The first one, like we mentioned, is where your free cart goes, and then you have 3 additional slots for 3 other carts. The cost of 1 food next to each of those. To purchase costs 1 coin. You can also move things from your board that you've placed there during the planning phase into your warehouse. This is the only place to move things to your warehouse. In fact, one of the upgrades you can buy is you can increase this number of spaces that are available if you really want to start just dumping resources into your warehouse. And that's one that comes out at the end of the game, which is when it's most useful. You can also purchase house cards. House cards cost 2 stones, essentially building a house. Each house card is going to be worth 4 points as a base point value, and then you're going to gain bonus points based on a resource depicted on there, and then you get 1 point at the end of the game for every resource that you own of that type. So if I get a house card that has stone, every stone I have will give me a bonus point at the end of the game.
The stone is already worth 1 point. Each of your stone is now worth 2 points.
Right. I went kind of heavy on fish our last game that we played, and I ended up getting the fish house card. I think it was worth 8 points. There's not a lot of fish tokens, so I got 12 points for that 1 card.
That's one thing to keep in mind as well when you play this game. Food is not worth anything. I went through the first 3 quarters of the game planning on getting the food house card and getting a bonus point for all my food tiles. And I was also planning on storing my food in the warehouse, neither of which you can do.
That is very true, Dave. But yet you still were only 9 points behind the leaders, so
yeah.
Still played well, even though you figured that about a third of the way through the game. Food's not worth anything. Corn's not worth anything at the end of the game. Fish aren't worth anything at the end of the game. They were for me because I had the house card for it. Alpacas, surprisingly, are not worth anything at the end of the game.
Right.
Yeah, I was really surprised because nobody starts with alpaca. Well, maybe somebody starts
with a roll card.
Yeah.
You can get alpaca at the beginning.
That's what my roll did. Is my roll made it so that I could trade 1 food for an alpaca. My people start with a bunch of food and an alpaca and ways of getting alpaca. So I figured I would run with that. And then I was like, wait a minute, I don't get any points for this stuff.
But alpaca are one of the few things you can sell at the market. Because you can't sell every resource type at the market. Having those alpaca at the beginning of the game and actually having something you can sell can be super beneficial. Not everybody gets to buy a silver the very first turn, like Nathan was able to.
Not everybody gets to come in last place either.
That's true. Only one person gets to, unless you tie for it. The last location we have to talk about is the mine. The resources that are stored there are stone, ore, and silver. Silver is the only other resource besides textiles that's worth 3 points, so it's a high value resource. Surprisingly, there's a way to get stone on your starting board too.
My starting board it wasn't on mine, but it gave me the resources turn 1 to create silver,
which is nice. So you started with ore. One of the components you need ore and food to get silver. However, nothing on your starting board to get ore. Because of your roll card, you started with ore. To get ore during the game, you either have to get a canoe card or get an upgrade to your player boards.
Kind of gives us a good sampling of Altiplano. I really like the game. I'm looking forward to more plays. Highly consider putting this on my 10 for 10 for 2022.
Dave, what did you think?
I didn't think I had played this before. And we started setting it up, and I was like, wait a minute, I totally played this, and I loved it the first time I played it. I really enjoyed it again. I was a little frustrated with myself, waited until the game was almost over before learning certain key points of it. I think it's a great game. I think they've done an excellent job of balance, incorporating a lot of things. Like I mentioned, my role that I started with, I thought of it as vastly inferior, but I did great. Even if it is an inferior role, you're not hamstrung by whatever your role is. I think they did a really good job in all regards, really.
I agree. At the times I've played this, it's been great. I actually picked my copy up at SaltCon back in 2020. Anytime we get to the table, I'm happy. My one complaint, and I only have one, and that is the quality of the components.
Yeah. The wagons or the baskets that you store your tokens in, they don't like to stay together, so you have to either tape them, glue them.
Mine are actually completely delaminating from each other. They're completely coming apart. They just kind of fold together. It's like the whole cardboard is coming apart. My alpaca won't stay together for starting player. I'm really tempted just to 3D print some stuff. Those are the two biggest things. I mean, everything else is kind of cheap cardboard compared to other games. but they're fine. It's just containers in the alpaca starting player.
We played my copy for the first time, and everything got put together first time that we played it. And my alpaca, he stays together, but his legs are weird, and the wagons, they won't stay together. If there's one thing to complain about the game, that would be it. The game is designed by Reiner Stockhausen, published by Renegade Games, and plays 2 to 5 players, which is always great for our group.
That is.
Plays in about 60 to 120 minutes.
Great game. That is alpaca.
Nope.
No, it's not.
That is not alpaca. That is Altiplano. Highly recommend it.
Second.
Until next time.
We'll see you in the Andes. Not Andes, but we'll see you in the Andes.
As always, we want to thank you for listening.
Check out our website. We have all sorts of cool things there. Love those blogs. Get a deeper look into the writing side of Meeple Nation.
Join our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air. I look forward to seeing you there.
Follow us on Twitter, @MeepleNation. We also have Instagram.
Under the same name. We also want to thank our sponsor, GameToppersLLC.com.
We love their product. And there's so much goodness out there.
And we also want to thank Brain Detergent for our music. Building up your own production and to be the best, it can be the best. Only other resource besides tech.
Highly consider putting this on my 10 for 10 for 2020, for 2022.
Wow. We're going back in time, huh?
Let's not go back to 2020.
Putting this on my 10 for 10 for 2020. Putting this on my plan for... No, screw it. Putting this on...
Good stuff. All right.
Putting this on my 10 for 10 for 2022.